Thank you for your presentation, and we have a copy of your comments that have been distributed to all the members. So Mark Murray, but really not Mark Murray. Your name is, and you're representing Citizens Against Waste.
Nick Lapis with Californians Against Waste. I apologize that Mark got called away into a meeting. He asked me to share his apologies. It was a last-minute meeting, and he was going to try to make it here on time, so if you see him run into the room, you can tag team and spot. Thank you for the invitation to participate in this panel. We spend a lot of time talking about the majority of the greenhouse gas emissions under AB 32 that really have nothing to do with waste and recycling. But waste and recycling offer an opportunity to reduce emissions not only at the landfill, but also across other sectors. And the questions that were posed in the invitation that you provided to us were really touched on the investment plan. I think we spent a lot of time talking about the investment plan, but also they were broader questions about the role of waste in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and also the role of California as a leader in the sector. So I'm going to be slightly broader than just focusing on the investment plan. Really, I think we have an example in this sector of where the Air Resources Board and CalRecycle have set an example and a model for maximizing the opportunities for greenhouse gas reductions through the sector. I think it's a model for both other agencies and for other states as well, because there's such a huge opportunity to impact every other part of the greenhouse gas generating spectrum. They've really laid out a clear vision that we strongly support that focuses on the two biggest opportunities for greenhouse gas reductions. The biggest opportunity, and the one I'll talk about first, is ending the practice of landfilling food scraps and yard trimmings over the next decade. The second one, which I'll get to in a minute, is recovering more traditional recyclables, but almost more importantly, reintroducing those recyclables into California's manufacturing economy as opposed to shipping them overseas. So as Chair Nichols mentioned, the ARB is really focused on the concept of we have material that we are wasting, and organic wastes in general are one of the most appalling forms of this problem. And in order to meet our short-lived climate pollutant goals, in order to meet our recycling goals, in order to meet all these different goals, we need to take that material and divert it to higher and better uses. We traditionally like to say that it's really not all about the landfill emissions. There's a lot more than just the landfill at stake, but landfills are 20% of the state's methane emissions. And as Chair Nichols highlighted, addressing those methane emissions is very important. There's only so much you can do in terms of capturing that gas. You can install a gas collection system, but we're talking about 400, 500 acre hole in the grounds that, the material starts degrading and rotting the second you put it in the landfill, and it's going to keep degrading and rotting far after you remove the gas collection system. But really, it's about much more than the landfill emissions. It's about the fact that we have much better things to do with that material. One obvious one that comes to mind that a lot of people, I believe, support is getting edible food to hungry people. We have a lot of perfectly wholesome produce that goes to landfills for a variety of systemic issues, and that can be recovered with pretty simple changes in our food recovery infrastructure, but also consumer education. There are also programs like Mr. Pellegrini's food waste to animal feed, and there are a variety of other uses that we just know we can do better things with this material than landfill it. And if we compost it and anaerobically digest it, we can make a soil amendment that not only avoids those emissions, but also sequesters carbon and gets to some of the things that Mr. Bloomberg mentioned in the agricultural sector. However, to date, we've not been able to capitalize on this low-hanging fruit for a variety of reasons, mostly cost, but also systemic problems with getting this material recycled. So while we've done a good job with traditional recyclables, we continue to landfill this material at a very, very high rate, the organic waste. And so really the ARB and CalRecycle have identified a multi-legged stool to overcome this problem. The first leg of that is the legislation that has come from this House. There have been 5 bills in the last 5 years having to do with organic waste. And, they sort of spread the responsibility between the state government, local governments, and individual generators and the waste haulers. The other piece of that is ARB looking at regulatory authority and what can they do through the short-lived climate pollutant regulations, and the administration focusing on healthy soils and developing markets for this material. But the third stool that the ARB has identified is the funding and the need for this infrastructure. We need to build somewhere between 100 and 200 new facilities to handle this material, all sorts of facilities from anaerobic digesters to composting facilities to food waste to animal feed facilities. And they're estimating a needed investment of about $100 million a year over the next 5 years to build that infrastructure. And switching gears just for 1 second to the other half of the waste sector, which is traditional recyclables. Like I said, we've done a great job getting them out of people's trash cans into the recycling bin, but then we take that material and we ship it overseas. And while the landfill emissions are an obvious part of any greenhouse gas inventory, the emissions that you can reduce by recycling material in state are really the rest of the inventory. So Mr. Shaw brought up the role of manufacturing, and that's a perfect example. If a glass plant increases their use of recycled glass, they directly reduce their emissions by lowering the temperature of the furnace in their facility. We have similar benefits for plastic, for fiber, for carpet, where if we use more recycled content, we have direct emission reductions. But there's also the second benefit of avoiding leakage and supporting California manufacturers and California jobs, because if we take that same glass plant example, so we're not only reducing the emissions at the glass plant, but we're keeping that glass plant from relocating somewhere else and basically moving our emissions to Mexico or Nevada or Arizona. And finally, I did not focus on the climate investments as much, but the investments represent those two priority areas. And I did just want to highlight, the gentleman from the Department of Finance mentioned that these are the most cost-effective programs of any state agency. They're also the most oversubscribed programs. We had $160 million worth of applicants for $20 million worth of funding. And they were also the first agency to get the money out the door, and they had one of the best public transparent processes in terms of quantifying the greenhouse gas emissions. This is really a model not only for other agencies, but like I said, for other states, for really low-hanging fruit for greenhouse gas reductions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, and thank you for your patience, that representing the environmental justice community, Alvaro Sanchez, Environmental Equity Director from the Green Lining Institute. Thank you very much for spending the morning and now part of the afternoon with us.
Thank you. I'm sure you're all hungry just as the way I am too. Thank you for the invitation to participate today. My name is Alvaro Sanchez. I'm the Director of Environmental Equity at the Green Lining Institute. For those of you that don't know, the Green Lining Institute is a 23-year-old policy, research, organizing, and leadership institute working for racial and economic justice. My team worked on this to create a world in which all communities have access to clean air and water, and where one's life expectancy is not determined by zip code, race, or income. We work on this by working on climate investments within disadvantaged communities, the rollout of electric vehicles and trucks across the state, creating an inclusive clean energy economy, and promoting integrated neighborhood-scale approaches to sustainability. So we've all been talking about today about California's multi-pronged effort for combating climate change. And this effort charges polluters for the climate and lung-damaging garbage they put into our air. But that's really just the start. It's what we do with the money that is truly a game changer here. We know which communities get hit first and worst by climate change. These are low-income communities of color, like those in West Oakland, in the Valley, and in Southern California, in LA. Communities for generations have been redlined and used as toxic dumping grounds for facilities like oil refineries and freeways that wealthier neighborhoods didn't want in their backyards.
Except for Porter Ranch.
Yes, right now, absolutely. So it's only fair that these communities that receive the benefits from a growing clean energy economy, from jobs to healthier air. California is indeed making significant progress towards achieving this goal, And we still have a long way to go to ensure that disadvantaged communities receive the necessary resources to fight poverty and pollution. Something amazing is happening in California, and the world is really watching. Thanks in large part to your leadership on climate issues, California is leading the nation and the world on how we address climate change. This was very much clear by the interest and respect that the California delegation received at the UN Climate Summit in Paris, where California was not only the case study that received the most attention for what other governments and subnationals can do to fight climate change, it was also the inspiration that many use to describe what can be possible. So it's for this reason that we have a tremendous responsibility to our communities here that we get things right, and that the models we share improve the lives of impacted communities everywhere. I heard from colleagues from developing nations that our approach to climate investments within disadvantaged community was particularly interesting to them because the conditions that our communities face here are very similar to the populations of their nations. So to learn how disadvantaged communities fared in the first year of climate investments, the Greenlining Institute conducted a study of 10 projects funded by the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Funds. You received the executive summary of this report.
On page 5.
Our findings show that California is indeed on its way to delivering climate investments that achieve multiple benefits. In addition to providing clear environmental benefits, when completed, these 10 projects alone will provide over 2,000 solar power systems for low-income families, generating nearly 6 megawatts of clean power. They will plant over 2,000 trees in disadvantaged communities, provide over 200 homes at a permanently affordable rate to lower-income households, create over 400 jobs, and replace 600 old, highly polluting cars and trucks with clean electric or plug-in hybrid vehicles. So this data is just from these 10 projects. Now consider the impact that we will have after a couple of years of full implementation from the climate investment programs. Moving forward, the second 3-year investment plan keeps California on the right track to fight poverty and pollution. The new investment plan recognizes the value of programs that were in the first 3-year investment plan by retaining them as strategies to meet our climate goals. These programs include low-carbon transportation, community greening, low-income energy programs, public transit, and sustainable community, among others. The second investment plan also makes significant additions that are worth noting. Integrated projects is included as a concept that deserves our attention. Supporting projects that integrate multiple cross-cutting approaches to reduce greenhouse gas emissions has the potential for catalytic impact at the neighborhood scale, while also increasing job opportunities, economic, health, and environmental benefits. We're also happy to see the inclusion of short-lived climate pollutants in the investment plan as an opportunity to lessen local climate change impacts while improving the air quality and health in communities most impacted by local sources of air pollution. Concepts that we support but did not make the final draft of the plan, and we hope will make future iterations of this plan, include industrial ecology for greening up small businesses, free transit passes for low-income riders, green active transportation networks, bike infrastructure, and rebates for those bikes. In closing, I'd like to go back to California's leadership on this issue at a world stage. Because of how important our role is, and because we have a responsibility to the communities that are most impacted in our state, we really need to get this right. While we have achieved great success, there's a lot more that needs to be done, and the following are 4 recommendations that I have for how we can achieve this. Disadvantaged communities still lack the necessary resources to mitigate pollution impacts. We must do a lot more to provide relief to these communities, which are hit first and worst by climate change. Currently, only 10% of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is required to be allocated to address the needs that are within the top 25% most impacted communities in California. This amount of money is simply not enough. For this reason, we support AB 1550, which has been introduced by Assemblymember Jimmy Gomez, and look forward to working with him and you all to strengthen SB 535. We also need to assure community stakeholders that climate investments are working and are reliable. The funding pause that we're experiencing right now for many programs that only receive partial funding or no funding at all in fiscal year 2015-2016 is creating a lot of uncertainty and questions about the entire climate investments program. This unnecessary pause has only increased the feeling that communities are being left out from receiving benefits from our climate policies. Across all programs, we still need a lot of work to do to incentivize achieving multiple co-benefits and adopting anti-displacement strategies. While reducing greenhouse gases is the primary goal of our climate investments, our model for delivering triple bottom line benefits that promote people, planet, and prosperity is the reason why California's model is worth replicating across the globe. And finally, we need to make it easier for community stakeholders to learn about climate investments and participate in their benefits. We encourage the state to work across agencies to bundle customer-facing benefits like electric vehicle incentives, weatherization upgrades, and low-income solar, as well as to provide an easy-to-use universal application that can qualify anybody who would benefit from these investments. We must also make sure that the clean energy economy develops in a manner that is inclusive and representative of California's growing diverse population. I don't want us to replicate the mistakes that were done by the growth in the tech sector, which lacks a lot of that diversity. And finally, we need better tools to communicate our success. I encourage you to visit upliftcalifornia.org, a project of the Greenlining Institute and our allies that communicates the real-life benefits from California's climate policies. You received a couple of stories in your package as well, and we hope you enjoy reading those. I want to thank you for your time, and I just want to finish by saying that when we help the neediest among us, we're really helping everyone when we do this. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that excellent presentation, and I could tell it was very heartfelt as well. I don't know, do you have any questions? I do not.
I do not.
So I want to thank all three of you, Mr. Bloomberg. We took good notes, you know, but your great work with the TNC. Extend our greetings to Mark Murray. You did a great job on your behalf, and we look forward to always working with Greenlining Institute. You've been a great voice for people who need a voice in this process, so thank you. All right.
So members of the public are congratulated for waiting so long. I would ask if you could come up. There's 4 microphones. Most of you are familiar with this. If we can, given the hour, if we could be brief, that would be great. Please, go ahead.
Mr. and Madam Chair, Michael Pimentel here with the California Transit Association, a trade organization representing more than 85 transit operators statewide and more than 200 public and private transit-related entities in all. I'd like to start by thanking the Joint Committee legislative leaders and Governor Brown for continuing to explore new strategies and innovations for combating climate change. As you consider how we might act locally and invest in ways that maximize California's greenhouse gas emission reduction potential, I want to emphasize that there is perhaps nothing you can do that would be more profound than reimagining how Californians travel. In California, the transportation sector contributes approximately 40% of all greenhouse gas emissions in the state, while also devastating local air quality. And to this latter point, 7 of the 10 most polluted cities in America are in California, and 4 out of the 7 are located in the San Joaquin Valley. And so, as many of you have just recently come back from Paris, and I know others have traveled extensively worldwide, you know that California's experience and its reliance on single occupancy vehicles and petroleum doesn't need to be the norm. We can reverse course, and we can invest significant funds in public transit and intercity rail that makes our transportation network more integrated, efficient, and affordable. And just some stats in terms of efficiency, public transit produces 95% less carbon monoxide, 50% less carbon dioxide, and 50% less NOx per passenger mile as passenger vehicles. And so today, as you evaluate what you can do to have an impact locally, and I'll expand this to include improving air quality, mobility, creating jobs, and strengthening our economy, I ask that you consider investing more in public transit capital and operations, and I know that some of those on the committee already have taken the pledge, but I'd ask that you continue this fight. Thank you.
Thanks.
Next.
Senators, thank you very much. Julia Levin with the Bioenergy Association of California. I want just to make a couple of quick points. The first is thank you for your leadership in Paris and even more importantly in California. But I'd like to go from Paris, France to Paris, Riverside County, spelled P-E-R-R-I-S, where CR&R, a California company, has just built the largest anaerobic digestion facility in the country that's producing highly carbon negative transportation fuel, negative 31 grams. This is more than double the greenhouse gas reductions that an electric vehicle can provide. They're putting that fuel into ultra-low NOx garbage trucks, which are reducing particulate matter and NOx by 90% or more. This is a game changer in the transportation sector and for our management of organic waste. There is no investment you can make with cap and trade revenues that will achieve greater greenhouse gas reductions as quickly or greater reductions in air pollution, and particularly in the communities that are most impacted by air pollution, which are disadvantaged communities, communities in transportation corridors. So we urge the state to increase funding for biofuels out of the cap and trade revenues. These are the biofuels made from organic waste are the lowest carbon transportation of any kind and should be receiving a much higher share of the greenhouse gas reduction fund money, particularly the low carbon transportation funds. Second, there was a conversation earlier about uncapped sources of greenhouse gas emissions in California. And I just want to point out that wildfire is now responsible for 10% of California's total greenhouse gas emissions. The carbon sink that is so important to our overall strategy and for California's water supply and other purposes is going up in flames. 10% of the total emissions are coming from wildfire now. The governor's issued an emergency proclamation to deal with that. We're going to be removing tens of millions of dead trees that aren't good for much at all, but they're really good for producing low carbon fuels and flexible generation renewable power, and we need to invest more in that. We do also need to invest in dairy digesters and other diverted organic waste facilities. Finally, the last thing I want to say is thank you, Senator Pavley, for alluding to Senator Allen's legislation, which he's going to be reintroducing to establish a statewide policy to promote renewable gas. Chairman Nichols referred to all the obstacles that still exist in California to beneficially using our organic waste from all sectors. No amount of money will make up for a policy that really drives this industry forward the way that the RPS has for electricity and the LCFS is doing for transportation fuels. So we need to invest more in this area, and we also need a statewide policy to promote renewable low carbon gas. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Sir, please.
Thank you, Senators. Graham Noyes, I'm the Executive Director of the Low Carbon Fuels Coalition. I want to start by saying we support CalSTART's comments, what the Air Resources Board has recommended in their investment plan specific to the transportation sector and specific to fuels. But I really only want to make one specific comment that's responsive to Senator Wieckowski's question about what authority could the Air Resources Board have to be more effective in this sector. Speaking specifically to advanced biofuels, including biogas, we're in a place where we see $2 at the retail level prices. In the diesel fuel sector, that's $1 a gallon wholesale prices of diesel fuel out there. What we're seeing is essentially an inability to move forward with the next generation of advanced biofuel plants because we can't make the economics work with that kind of ROI. Where we have been successful in the transportation sector thus far, number one has been 1493, Senator Pavley's vehicle efficiency. Number two has been the low carbon fuel standard, which has delivered more than 10 million metric tons of greenhouse gas reduction over the course so far. But 80% of those fuels are coming from outside of California currently. We have within our membership DuPont, Iogen, and Cool Planet, all developing cellulosic biofuels, LanzaTech developing waste gases into very low carbon or reverse negative carbon fuels, and Fulcrum developing MSW into diesel fuel. But all of those companies, while they care a great deal about California, are outside California because the economics currently don't work for them. What ARB really needs and what our membership supports is multi-year spending authority to set up an innovative program that could support and make California really the focal point for the next generation of advanced biofuel plants. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Chair Wieckowski, Chair Pavley, Beth Olaso on behalf of the Ag Energy Association. We represent the interests of the state's 5 largest dairy digester developers, as well as the dairy industry overall. You know, Chairman Wieckowski, you brought up an important point in your opening comments about making the right investments and getting the bang for your buck. So to that point, the governor's budget proposes to spend less than 10% of total GGRF funds on short-lived climate pollutants. We believe that should be increased dramatically in the light of the important role that they play in climate change and our ability to achieve the short-term benefits. We should be maximizing the investments in methane reduction and black carbon reduction, and would like to thank Chair Nichols for bringing up the importance of reducing short-lived climate pollutants and the role dairy digesters can play in achieving those goals. More specifically, the governor's budget only proposes $35 million for dairy digester development next year. This is really inadequate to achieve the ambitious short-lived climate pollutant goals being sought by CARB, which, as a reminder, is to reduce dairy manure methane reductions by 75% by 2030. So achieving those reductions will require the development of roughly 600 new digesters. That $35 million we're looking at right now will fund roughly 8 to 12 digesters. So we're at a little disconnect there. So, you know, it really is one of the most bang for the buck investments that you can get out there. We know that organics diversion is right up there. But my final point is that the analysis completed by Environ that has just been handed out to you compares the return on investments for each category of investments being made in California currently. Dairy digesters and urban landfill diversion efforts provide among the best investments that can be made with GGRF funds. And just to note, investments in dairy digesters can provide 1 ton of CO2e reduction for every $1 to $2 invested. So 1 ton for every $1 to $2. If you're talking bang for buck, that's pretty darn good. So as we move forward, we look forward to working with you as decisions are made about how we invest the GGRF funds and how best to get the bang for the buck out of those funds. So thank you.
Next, sir.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Good afternoon, Senator Zurkowsky, Senator Pavley. I'll be brief in my comments, but I want to make 2 key important points in relation to, oh, I'm sorry, Ryan Kinney with Clean Energy. We're the nation's largest provider of natural gas transportation fuel. Just 2 important points related to GGRF appropriations. We do appreciate your support last year for the vehicle incentives bill that you voted for in Senate EQ that was supportive of $100 million per year for 5 years from 2018 to 2023. And that bill will be pursued again this year. It's also important to note it is a renewables bill, just because there is a renewable requirement of 30% starting in 2018 and up to 50% starting in 2020 within those 5 years. Also, since last year, ARB has certified a Cummins Westport .02 NOx engine that's 90% cleaner than any heavy-duty engine on the market right now. And if you add renewables, it's extremely clean. So if there's a .02 NOx standard for any technology, that's what the bill will be pursuing. So we would appreciate your thoughts for this year as well. I also want to bring up our biofuels initiative. We're in a coalition pursuing $210 million divided by 3 different silos for biofuels, for incentives for production and infrastructure. And there is some money in the proposed budget, but it's not nearly enough, we believe, at this point. So, Senator Pavley, we appreciate your couple letters and your SB 706 last year, which supported it.
We got a little bit more money this year.
Yes.
25 million, as you know, the CEC, and perhaps 40 million more from CARB, but we can do better.
Absolutely. Thank you for that comment. And as you know, on February 11th, CARB is holding a workshop to kind of look at prioritizing and how they would incentivize that $40 million. So I appreciate you making that comment. Again, the state cannot achieve their short-term and long-term environmental goals without transportation emphasis, and these 2 biofuels and vehicle incentives would tackle that. Thank you.
Our final commenter.
All right. Good afternoon, co-chairs Wieckowski and Pavley, Rico Mastrodonato at the Trust for Public Land. Thank you for the opportunity. And I just want to say that I'm proud to live in a state where the California legislature is looked from the rest of the world for climate leadership, as witnessed in Paris. With regard to the second investment plan, we're very supportive of the recognition of natural resources. There's actually an increase in the percentage of investments to natural resources of the overall GGRF pie, and of course that results in higher numbers. We think this is really important, and there are a couple things I want to flag that in the proposed budget that we're hoping to get legislative support for. First is the new urban greening program introduced in the 16-17 budget. We feel that this is a sector of investments that was really not addressed in the first investment plan. There wasn't a good fit to do, projects like green alleys or local parks or river parkways from the existing programs. So they really re-looked at the urban greening program that was created from Prop 84 and are going to make it a GHG-focused program, obviously. But this is really going to address some multi-benefit green infrastructure in urban areas that is not currently addressed in the first investment plan, and we think is incredibly important to connecting communities and getting people out of their cars for short trips. It's obviously got a cooling effect on urban heat islands, which will reduce energy consumption, and the co-benefits. You both represent coastal communities that are staring right down the barrel of sea level rise. We have an El Nino that's happening where 85% or something, 80% at least, of the water that's hitting the ground in some areas, urban areas, is just getting shuffled off into the Santa Monica Bay in some cases, and other places. We should be capturing that water. Green infrastructure allows for capturing stormwater, permeable surfaces, human health benefits also, air and water. So, this is a real confluence of the sweet spot of a lot of areas that we want to make policy areas we want to make improvements on, and we're really pleased to see that recognition in the governor's budget and hope to get legislative support. And the last thing I want to flag is the increased investments in forest health. We think that better management and conservation of our forests is going to allow for trees to grow bigger and older, and that's where we're going to get the carbon benefit. But we have to make these investments now. I mean, these are investments that pay over time, just like an interest in a bank. And the sooner we do it, the better we're going to be in 2050 to achieve these higher goals. So again, I just want to thank you both for your leadership and appreciate the opportunity to speak now.
Thank you. And our final comment.
Hello, I apologize for coming in so late, and I know in the interest of time, and I'll keep my remarks short and brief as possible. My name is Damon Conklin. I represent EVCA, which is the Electric Vehicle Charging Association. We represent companies that are headquartered primarily here in California or have a presence in California. And with the growth of electric vehicle charging infrastructure, technology, and service industry, we're committed to making EV the vehicle of choice in California and realize our state's goal of putting 1.5 million zero emission vehicles on the road by 2025. With innovation and favorable public policies from this body, we've grown exponentially in the last 5 years, from 1,200 ports to 9,000 ports, just in the workplace and public arena, including private residential. We're well over 20, near 30,000. Big gains in California with another 3,200 jobs here in California. Our goals are to make electric vehicle charging convenient, ambiguous, cost-effective. We support customer choice and competition and collaboration among all stakeholders. We believe in harnessing innovation and competition and private investment, and so that it doesn't fall directly on the ratepayers themselves. We are also supporting easing regulations and streamlining permit process and promoting sustainable financing and financial incentives for electric vehicles, infrastructure, and services. We supported 350 and the strides that the legislature has made to promote utility investment in the way that promotes competition and leverages or balances both ratepayers and private funds. We look forward to working with the legislature and moving California forward.
We enjoyed our time in Paris with ChargePoint and Tesla and some people that are in this medium. I have no final comments. Co-Chair Pavley, do you have anything?
No, I just thought it was a very worthwhile hearing, and I want to thank you for taking the lead on putting this together, and a lot of good information, good testimony.
More
We
work
have
to
more
be,
work to do.
more work to be done. This meeting's adjourned.